We are in Shimoni slave caves, which are found in Kwale County. Kwale County is off the Indian Ocean coast of Kenya.
It's a fascinating cave. In terms of its geology, it is a coral cave formed over many years. And so for us as architects, these are very interesting structures in their own right. And we also look at them as pieces of heritage. And their proximity to the ocean was perfect in the most darkest way possible.
These caves were used to hold slaves that were gotten from the inland. They were brought here, chained to the walls of the cave as they waited for a ship that sailed along the Indian Ocean coast, picking up slaves and taking them down to Zanzibar. And Zanzibar was the largest slave market at that time.
There were chambers which could hold quite a number of individuals. And with this network specifically, we've analyzed it to be the scale of almost 1,000 square meters. Yeah. And with that regard, you find that quite a number of slaves could probably have been held within this segment before they were put on ships. So it was probably a very cramped space. Right now we're looking at it, beautiful, expansive, in this time of the season, probably quite airy. But in reality, you can imagine how dark, dingy, smelly, and intense this space was, with men, women, and children held captive, not knowing where they're going, just brought in by slave merchants that colluded with the local people to actually extract resources. And these resources were human beings. So we analyze these spaces in that sense, to not look at the beauty, but to look at that really complex past. I'm sorry, I wasn't. You know, it's easy to forget that people were here.
Wow, how did I end up being an architect? I was born in a place called Nanyuki, and then when I was about 7, we moved to Nairobi. My dad was a banker, and we got to travel quite a bit around the country. Yeah, but my dad in the bank was sort of involved with a lot of the facilities. And so whenever the bank was expanding, he was the one in charge of that. And so he got to meet a lot of architects. And one of the architects he met was a lady. And at that time, architecture in Kenya was very male dominated. And so he was very inspired, awed, and he took an interest. He was always speaking about her because anytime they went for site meetings, he would be amazed at a lady taking charge and telling the engineers and the workers and everything. So that sort of really inspired him to inspire me. And yeah, I think that's where it really stemmed from for me. So it was planted quite early in my head, what architecture was. And then later on, when I was in high school, and that's when you start, begin thinking about what your career is going to be. Since this seed had been planted, it was something I was exploring, but also wanting to really challenge the status quo, because still, even when I was starting university in Kenya, it was mainly male students. They would start off with maybe like in a class of 60 students in first year, they would have like maybe 10 or less ladies, and by the time the 6 years of architecture school is over, maybe one girl would be left. So for me, that was really a challenge I wanted to break. Yeah, anything a boy can do, I can do. Yeah, I can do better sometimes, not all the time.
I grew up. Well, I grew up in Nairobi, so I'm born and bred in the city of Nairobi. That's the only city I know. My life has been very much about a sort of straightforward experience with two siblings, growing up just wanting to be out in the wild and having fun and experiencing nature for what it is. I've always been intrigued by drawing. That's been my passion. Being able to see something and then draw it. Like something that happens in your brain that then translates to you communicating with yourself in the act of drawing. So I always used to draw from when I was a really young boy. I remember the first thing I drew ever was a plant. And I was so excited that I could actually draw something that looks like what I'm seeing. It's actually quite close to Stella's answer. My father was a great influence in my life. And I remember an experience in a car driving, and he would, first of all, would always tell me, okay, Kabage, you can be whatever you want to be in life. Do you know what you want to be? And honestly, I didn't have an answer. I just said I love to draw, and that's it. But coming from a sort of poor background, which he grew up, and coming from the outskirts of the city and into Nairobi, working really hard to be where he was, he would always push me and say, okay, yes, you like to do this, but what else is there? What would you like to do? And he would ask me, okay, what are you seeing around that you like? And so I would say, yeah, I like these things, these houses and buildings that come up, I don't know. And so that sparked a conversation about figuring out what architecture is. And he'd say, have you looked at this? And I was just young, I was barely a teenager. And I think at that point, there became that interest of looking at this artifact in the landscape that for a sort of brief period of time, I was shocked that people were involved in designing them and bringing them to life. And so from that point, I think I got a real interest in what architecture is. And from there, gradually got towards a stage where I was, leading towards an architecture. Yeah, so we're in Rift Valley. We're in the Rift Valley in the heart of the cradle of mankind. It's a vast valley that stretches right from Syria down through towards Ethiopia, Kenya, straight to Mozambique. So in many respects, it's one of the largest geological features that define East Africa. And in its heart are multiple creatures, multiple communities, crossing multiple nations. And it is where we emerged as a species over 250,000 years ago. And so from that, we also regard the Rift Valley as the corridor of mankind. That's something we define in ourselves, because we emerged and traversed towards the global north, with some of us remaining here, but many going up. And in many respects, this is like a return back to this territory through the corridor again of humanity. Yes.
Passes through
Yes.
Nyaga.
Yes.
And it goes and
It goes down towards Tana.
very good.
Yes.
This one
This one's a different one.
was Niro, not Niro. It was Niro is brown water. The Samburu they have changed that.
Okay.
Niro. Yes, Niro.
As Cave Bureau, small office we've created, both Stella and I, we come here a lot because we thought it important to call our practice cave. And cave for us is the origin. It's a starting point, as we are in the origin. So architecturally speaking, this is our heritage and our sort of origin point. And it's a site where we do a lot of research. It's comprising of multiple caves, which were formed when this mountain erupted almost 2 million years ago, or at least that's when it's roughly estimated, between 1 and 2 million years ago. And a site where multiple volcanic lava tubes have formed. And for us at Cave Bureau, this is the epicenter of our research. It's a site where we consistently survey caves using 3D scanning technology, understanding the ecosystem, the life, which is abundant and rich. Below here, you wouldn't know it, but there are multiple creatures, from leopards, different kinds of antelopes, baboons, huge birds of prey, among other species, which are fantastic. Equally, the plant life, the tree life, which is almost prehistoric. But also, it's a sort of place of perfect natural balance. And in a way, it's this thing that, at least for us, we feel is the true icon, to look at an environment which is in perfect balance with itself, or community that are working to keep it just as that. And so we celebrate it as well as analyze it in geological terms, in ecological terms, thinking about the life that actually lives here, and how, in a small way as architects, we can think of preservative modes of practice to think about this space beyond just building. And in many respects, we always argue there's no need to have a building here. It's beautiful and perfect the way it is. I think that moment, at least for me, came at university when, for the longest time, I thought I knew what I'm studying or why I'm studying architecture. But it was only when I went through a sort of critical studies workshops within the school in terms of the history of architecture, thinking about, what has born architecture in the first place within a different context. I think it was at that very moment that I realized you could question, what is the essence of architecture and how does it come into being fundamentally? And who takes part in that process of generating architecture? And so it's through that process of looking at the history, in many respects hidden behind the stories of architecture, in terms of the modern movement. And what we came to realize, obviously, behind the modern movement, there was a lot of, a sort of troubled past, within the project of civilization, where multiple countries were going through immense subjugation through colonization. And that's a history within architecture that was purely sort of glazed over. And so it was moments of probing that, then I began to question, okay, then, what is this movement? At that time, we were being trained within the sort of international style of thinking about, that celebrated 20th century artifice of architecture. And it's only later that we look behind the scenes and start to see, okay, these buildings were symbols of other things that were quite disturbing. So the building itself came to question. And that, I think for me at least, was the moment of reckoning, to look beyond construction of a building, to think of architectural thought as transcending that possibly, and even repairing certain things behind the scenes that have not quite been thought through.
I think the questioning architecture, came much later after meeting Kabage. I think I had worked in big farms for so long that I'd just sort of become like a machine. Without questioning much, your boss gives you what to do, you do it, you get paid, and it becomes a cycle. And so when we left in 2014 and started the practice cave, is when we started having these conversations which were never there before. It was just like, have you done this detail? Where is this drawing? Have you met the client? Have you emailed? So there was a lot of talking that was involved. It's when some of these thoughts started coming out, and it was just like, wow, there's so much more to just getting a client, get client brief, design, start construction, finish, next. Yeah, so it was this little sort of conversations we'd have in the office and start questioning and asking what if, and then what if actually became a reality. And we started, with the name of our company, Cave, decide let's look at a cave that's quite close to Nairobi, not too far off, it's just a few minutes drive. And within these caves, you start realizing or questioning, where am I from? These caves were used by the Mau Mau freedom fighters. This was what they used as shelter. And then you start thinking even way back before the Mau Mau cave was the original shelter for man. So within all this period, there's so much to be explored before you come to designing a house. So that by the time you get a client who's asking, I want to do a house or I want to do this building, you have all this information within you that I think is very important for any architect to know. You don't just jump in. You need some historical background. And then from that history, I think you're able to better inform your design, or you're more intentional in what you do, more intentional with the clients you actually pick. It has made me, at least, think a lot more than just what do I get from this client. This was the first caves we actually came to, document and do some activities, talk about the caves, the relationship with the community, the relationship with nature, the animals, plant species. So yeah, and we just keep studying them. And the more we come, the more we learn. Every time I come here, I learn something different that I didn't know before.
These caves. You see here is a fossil of a bat.
So as mentioned in the when we were at the crater, it's a lava tube cave, quite a big network, and the number is 18. So we're in section 18C and D. And this lava tube section is quite fascinating because it's probably one of the largest huge roof collapses we have here in Suswa. And at least for us architecturally, we find it's very similar to Rome's Pantheon, at least in terms of its geometry and its formation with the oculus, with the dome shape. And what we did was 3D scan the cave to analyze it in measurements, and we found it extremely similar. So we feel and argue that it predates the Pantheon by a few million years. And so with caves being the origin of architecture and us inhabiting spaces like this, we feel it has been embedded within our consciousness as human beings. And so we've sort of evolved with that understanding of space, which been passed down from generation to generation, to the point where an architect designed structures that look very similar to caves. And so this is part of our argument when looking at the cradle of mankind, that what you're looking at is the very start and beginning of architecture.
I guess it's just interference with nature. This cave has not been interfered in any way by man, except for, right now, like we are walking through, but it has not been interfered with at all. It's used by the baboons, so this is what we call the baboon parliament, and they've not changed anything. They've not moved rocks about to create space. They sleep on the ledges. They've not put rocks on top there, so they've just come and embraced the cave as it is. So I think looking forward in architecture is be more cognizant of nature and how we can design with nature in mind and not disrupt it so much, but sort of, embrace it as it is and fit in with what nature has given you. Because as humans, we've tended to disrupt a lot. And with the past, knowing what the past has been and what it has done, looking forward is now trying to just embrace nature.
During the colonial struggle, there were many people, and specifically the Mau Mau fighters, would use caves as hiding spaces. And this is one of them, a sort of site which had multiple modes of entry and exit, so you could evade the sort of forces that came to fight the Mau Mau. So it also has that huge historic relevance as a space where, at least we imagine, they contemplated a new African state of the future, which was without being subjugated and held and bound, but with freedom and imagination. And so for us, we do scan these caves with that in mind, to reflect on them as real-time heritage.
These caves have my story, where it began. I can come here freely. There's a time people were hiding here so that I could come here freely. It's got a very deep connection to every Kenyan, really, because they owe it to the Mau Mau freedom fighters who risked their lives. Many were killed. They spent time in these caves strategizing to fight for the freedom of all Kenyans. So without these caves, I don't know. I don't know where we would be. turning our logo or Africa, or seemingly turning Africa upside down, as you rightly say, is from a European perspective. It's been turned upside down. But has it? Because when you're in space, there's no up or down. But I suppose because a lot of Europe colonized the global south, they might have done the maps to be on top of their colonies. So we question that a lot and say, when you're in space, there's really no up or down. So you can look at Africa from any way you want. Yeah, so that's the genesis of us seemingly turning it upside down. We haven't turned it upside down. It's our perspective of how Africa is.
I think part of that exercise was thinking about, yes, the sort of foreign gaze, and I think it was more about a liberation to look at the continent in a way that's not really looked at. Because cartography, the essence of map making, was the very tool of conquest. And so we, in a way, use the map in a similar action to reverse that power and use it to actually look at where we are today in a sort of, yes, confrontational manner, but to express it purely through an act of map making. And I think we're always asked when we go into meetings, I think you've got the map wrong, what's going on here? And for one, it's great because it's a sort of icebreaker. It opens up the scene, but then it opens up our philosophy immediately to start to say, this is what we're about, this is why we're doing it, and it's not to say we're wrong or the other perspective is right. It's to just say, why not?
The Maasai as a way of life. They've been pastoralists for centuries. That is their way of life. They have tried as much as possible. If they are not the only tribe in Africa, at least in East Africa, I can say they are one of the very few communities that have preserved that culture of pastoralism. So animals are very integral part of their lifestyle, of their heritage, of their culture. And with climate change, means that the land is becoming dry, there's no water, and so it's very difficult to keep these animals. And so either they end up selling them or they die from the drought. One of the big dreams we have is, as we all know, water is life. With water, you don't need to do so much because it's there and it will nourish both you, your animals, and the land. And so to be able to harvest this water from underground, and as well as the rainwater, because a lot of the times rainwater comes, drains and goes away. But we can look for ways to tap into even that rainwater, collect it and store it, so that when we come to drier months of the year, or when there's a drought or prolonged drought like we've had, there's a place that we know we have storage, and both for the land, for the animals, for the people. And you know, the life cycle continues even when it's dry elsewhere, because we've thought ahead and resources are getting scarcer and scarcer. So if we can preserve whatever we have when we think of a harsher future, I think for us that's important. What does architecture have to do with this? I think architects are thinkers. Architects think ahead. Architects are actually one of the disciplines that contribute greatly to climate change. Because when you think of all the buildings, for instance, that come up, the energy that's used to just bring up a building. So we as CAVE have taken a step back and thought, as opposed to contributing more to the climate change, how about we take a step back and think about how we can preserve this energy, as opposed to always just using. Let's give back, give back, give back.
The Biennale is a cultural hub, and it pulls the entire global sphere of cultural players in a unique way, like no other institution in the world. Yes, it has a really complex colonial history to the extent that its very foundations, and if you'd even look at it quite fundamentally, from all the pavilions, are representatives of European states, which by their very nature were colonial powers. So we are effectively at the epicenter and the heart of that celebration, historically speaking, which is a celebration of, so to speak, successful conquest of extreme extraction across the global south, which financed obviously what we're seeing here today. And it's easy to forget that amidst the beautiful works and expressions of both architecture, art, drama, theater, film. But at the heart of it is that foundation, which is both troubling, but equally, at least for us at CAVE Bureau, it is a site of presence where we believe it is still important to be located within, to actually begin a new discourse. I'm here alone without Stella. Stella is the other half of CAVE Bureau. And the most difficult thing is that we had planned this for a very long time, to be here together, to celebrate our achievements and this very opportunity. But unfortunately, if you'd call it, the ugly head of the past seemed to have come out, where people are restricted to move freely. People who have a right to be here are not coming to find asylum, but are coming here to celebrate. It is a challenge that's been expressed by Leslie Loco better than myself, of visas being denied on multiple levels and to multiple participants. Even to the extent the curator's own team, a lot of the members are not here. So we stand here, unfortunately, again, with resistance of that, because we feel it is discriminatory and it's not right. But we resist it respectfully. We resist it with craft and art. And that is why I felt it necessary to be here, initially wanting to showcase the work we're doing with the short videos. But I very quickly realized that we needed to bring out a performance of resistance, which is why you're seeing me in front of our installation, which was meant to just be observed without any performance, but as a statement of my own dissatisfaction and my anger to be here to say Stella should be here as well.
Yeah, how to move forward. Yes, we definitely need to forgive each other. But I think what's also important is to accept what has happened and not bury it under the sand like, nothing happened. I think it's very important for both sides, the perpetrators, the victims, in any circumstance around the world, because this has happened not just in the global south, it's happened in Europe and in America as well. I think is come to the table, discuss what's happened in the past, but it's in the past and there's really nothing we can do about it. It has happened, it has happened. What do we do moving forward without, not without ignoring the past, because in the past, there's mistakes that have been made and you don't want to carry them forward. There's good things that's happened in the past that you may want to borrow and carry forward. Right now, the world, the snow that's melting in the North Pole is affecting somebody in Africa, it's affecting somebody in Cambodia or in India, or it's affecting everybody. So it's no longer a problem for Europe or for Africa or for, Asia. We are all going through this. When the sea level rises, it's going to affect everybody because people down at the coast will move up, and then there's fighting for resources and all that. So I think we need to come to a point where we are all equal on the table, because we are all going to be affected. There's no superiority, there's no inferiority. The world belongs to all of us. And the sooner we realize that, I think the easier it will become to come to a solution quickly, to sort of save the world. We need to stop blaming, we need to stop victimizing ourselves. We just all need to come to the table as equals, as human beings, and then find a way forward.
It's a very controversial topic. I think for me, it's important to reflect on a simple fact. A lot of nations choose not to even apologize. And the reason for that is, as soon as you apologize or give a certain apology, certain things kick in the world of justice and law. And as soon as you see that step back of nations that were responsible for heinous acts in the past and are not even willing to apologize, then you realize there's no goodwill at all to actually repair. But there's more of a fear of what an apology would mean in terms of compensation, in terms of real justice. And so I think that is probably one of the most troubling things, because when you look at the world today and how it's transgressed in terms of immense extraction of resources in a sort of partial way where a few would actually benefit as opposed to the majority. What that has perpetuated is an increase in huge pollution and consumption of resources in an unsustainable manner that is causing huge deficits in resources. And not only that, immense pollution that is now completely changing the earth systems and changing the geology, hence the Anthropocene, an age where man is being centered in the focus to say we are now within the age of man. But when you look at that picture, it's an age of which man? Because there are certain select people who were involved in this project, which was the imperial and colonial project, of which the majority in the global south were not participating. So the effects, as Stella highlighted, where these huge shifts in climate are resulting in immense pressures in communities, was not caused by the communities who've actually experienced them and are experiencing them in most part. So what does that mean? What's fascinating is that you have huge bodies like the United Nations coming up with quite important approaches to look at ways to adapt to climate change. Hence the buzzword adaptation funds that can actually reverse the effects or allow communities to really actually adapt to the new conditions of the climate. In many respects, it's a synonym for reparation, but it's not being called that because as soon as the discourse about apology for the past crimes come into the play, the entire economic system is placed into question. So in my perspective, I feel until that question is put forward and quantified in terms of what an apology means in terms of past crimes, beyond saying, okay, we'll return this artifact that's in our museum, we'll return this thing that, yes, was partly stolen but moved from one museum to another, until we dig deep into that, we'll not be actually coming together at all.
The history of these caves is very dark, very sad, and it was a place of oppression, a place where your freedom was taken away. In as much as its history is dark, we have 3D scanned it, flipped it, and then used the naves of the cave as an idea to store rainwater. And then this rainwater can be used by animals during the drought. People could possibly also use it for cultivating. In a way, it's a place of healing when you think what this cave was and how you could use it, then making it better for somebody else's life.
For us, and what we've done with specifically this cave, which is incredibly dynamic, is use its geometry. Because again, as architects, that's all we can use. We can look at the geometry for what it was, but more importantly, look at what that geometry can be in the future. And when we look at it specifically in relation to the city environment, for example, and you analyze the structure of it, we playfully looked at ways of flipping it as a structure and thinking of it as possibly rainwater storage geometry. that could digitally be transported to different locations around and specifically within the city of Nairobi to deal with water scarcity. And these are ideas, these are conceptual imaginings that we take on board to think about what are the potentials of looking at spaces of trauma, but that can become spaces of healing.